Those who wait to be freed do not deserve freedom. Onwards, brothers and sisters! See the remnants of my bondage, and know you can be free. The Great Mage Rebellion starts now. So, who wants to kill the king?
Hello rebels and rabble-rousers, my name is Demacia, and oh my, we have a new champion heading to the PvE. Sylas the Unshackled is a shirtless, scruffy political dissident who steals ultimates and fights for the rights of magic users in Demacia. Or maybe he's a murderous, vengeful sociopath who pursues personal revenge under the guise of freedom fighting with no regard for collateral damage or who gets hurt in the process. So, what's the deal with that? Well, let's start with... So, for written lore, Sylas has two pieces associated with him right now. He has the bio that he's been launched with, and he has a short story that came out as a teaser a little while ago called Demacian Heart, which relates an early story about how Sylas, some of his life experience and so on. And it wasn't at the time completely clear that they were teasing a new champion with the story, but now that he's out, it's become pretty freaking obvious. So, what's actually contained in these? And by the way, when Sylas is released to the live servers, I fully expect that he's going to have a secondary short story added to his character, because the one they released as a teaser doesn't seem to be the, air quotes, official short story of the character. Usually a short story of the character will focus a little bit more on who they are in the present day and what they spend their time doing. So, as for the character concept of Sylas itself, it is, as you may expect from League of Legends, it's pretty archetypal, it's pretty tropey. He's really not a particularly new or unique type of character, but he's more a character who's filling a void that is kind of necessary for Demacia. He is essentially the angered Avenger archetype. He's the guy who used to be a loyal servant of the Thing, but then he suffered a series of personal betrayals and disillusionments, and now he's come to the conclusion that it's all corrupt and fake, burn it all down, and he's sort of been radicalized into this anti-authority crusader thing, but it's a very personal thing for him that's clearly about a lot about his anger and a lot about his personal betrayal by the system, which is something that I've seen in lots of different types of media before. I think we've all seen them, this particular archetype used in a lot of different types of media, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with it, but I can't help but personally be a little bit disappointed when the big new thing for the game comes out after they've teased him for a while, and then it's like, oh, it's that thing, but with the League of Legends brand slapped on the front of it. It's fine, it's just, it's not as interesting as perhaps I would have liked. But there is a good reason why this archetype needs to exist in League of Legends, and specifically in Demacia. Sylas as a character is essentially there to address the issue of Demacia being kind of a little bit fascist, as it were. Demacia, as we've been learning since the 2014 lore retcon, is a nation that heavily represses magic, that hates magic users, that hates mages, that hunts them actively within their border. It's essentially, it's a kingdom with, a hereditary monarchy controlling all power in the hands of a few nobles who are committing a genocide against a specific population group just because of the way they happen to be born. And that's the kind of thing that there probably should be a character in the game who's like, hey, that thing you're doing there where you're like murdering children just because they happen to be able to cast like a fire spell or whatever, that's probably really wrong. And that's where Sylas comes in. He's the character who, for the moment, he's the only character, but he's a character who exists to kind of embody that aspect of Demacia, that tremendous injustice that the country is doing to the mages within its borders. I am somewhat curious. The bio makes it clear that Sylas has a personal relationship with Lux. Lux being someone who came to him for guidance about how to control her magic and how to deal with, her magical talents and so on, while then also smuggling him in secret, like whatever books he wanted to read and telling him about the political realities of Demacia and so on and so forth. And they had this back and forth dynamic where Sylas, on the one hand, was quietly manipulating Lux, but Lux was establishing a kind of friendship bond towards him that may have been kind of one-sided. Although Sylas does spare her when he makes his escape attempt, or his successful escape rather. He kills everybody else, but he leaves Lux alive. So there is a relationship between these two characters that's going to be interesting to explore, especially when it comes to Lux's personal storyline, which again also has very much to do with the oppression of mages in Demacia, where she's one of the privileged mages who's like working for Demacia and who's not gonna get murdered for being a mage, but she's also kind of feeling a little bit icky about it, and she has the whole conflict with Garen and so on and so forth. Like, there's some interesting stuff going on there, but it does lead to a problem that is kind of inherent to the type of character that Sylas is. Because Sylas is a burn it all down, kill the oppressors anarchist. He's a rabble-rouser, he's a revolutionary. And that presents us with an interesting problem, because in order for Sylas's storyline to advance, he has to be working towards his goals, and his goal is a complete overthrow of the dominant power structure of Demacia. So, for him to have a meaningful progression in his story, he has to be progressing towards that goal. That is to say, we have the stories that deal with his story moving forward have to deal with him building like a popular rebellion within Demacia, some kind of popular uprising thing. They have to deal with him targeting enemy political leaders. They have to deal with him essentially working to undermine and overthrow the entirety of Demacia. And in order for him to be compelling as a character, he has to be a credible threat to the country. He can't just be some, lunatic in some backwater village, rabble-rousing a few farmers. He has to be an actual threat to the political realities of Demacia in order to be interesting. Which means that in order to progress Sylas's story, you have to be willing to make changes to Demacia as a whole. You have to be willing to make rather radical changes to Demacia as a whole. And this is where we have the problem, because Riot historically have not been very willing to upend the status quo of their video game. There has only been one time in all of League of Legends history where a substantial upheaval has happened in the status quo of a region. That is Misfortune overthrowing Gangplank and becoming the pirate lord of Bilgewater. Like, that's the only one that's really happened ever. And they haven't followed up on that in any meaningful way since they really did it very much. Like, there's been like a comic or something, but no real exploration of what happened in Bilgewater afterwards. Riot's track record on doing any kind of lore development is spotty at best, which is why with Sylas, it's kind of, oh yeah, we've got this radical, political rabble-rouser who's trying to foment an actual rebellion, an actual revolution in Demacia. But it's kind of hard to get excited about the future possibilities of that, because Riot have not especially shown that they are willing to do major upheavals internally in one of their regions in the way that Sylas's story progressing would demand. Which means, because there's two ways that Sylas's story can really go. It's the one where he actually succeeds in causing an actual rebellion in Demacia, and there's a lot of fallout from that. But the other one is the one where he mellows out and he goes, oh, maybe it's not so wrong after all. And I'm kind of worried that that's going to be the direction that Riot are going to be going with him. Like, he's going to have stories where he encounters mages who do terrible things with their magic, and oh, the poor people who can't use magic are being terrorized by these evil mages, and he kind of has to learn to modify his, political opinions to be a little bit more moderate towards the master, because that's a way that you can explore the character and progress the character's storyline without having to actually challenge the status quo of Demacia very much, which means it's kind of compelling if you're in a situation where you're like, we can't really do a massive lore event just upheaving the entire political structure of Demacia, but we can do a personal story about Sylas changing his political views. And that's my worry, is that they'll kind of default to that one because it's just easier to do. But, again, I'm always skeptical of Riot because their track record is just not great. But, here's hoping that Sylas is a signal that Riot are becoming more willing to do stuff that actually messes with the status quo of the League of Legends world, that actually, has some lasting, broader impact on the regions that the champions inhabit. Anyway, when or if Sylas has more substantial lore updates following his actual release onto the live servers, I'm probably going to be covering those, but for the moment, he seems to be a perfectly competently executed, very archetypal, very trope-based character who has a few interesting connections and who might be a signal that interesting things are about to be happening in his region. So, B+, perfectly fine. So that's the lore as it stands for the character right now, which means it's time to take a look at... Hey, I'm just gonna pop into the middle of the video to remind you all once again that Riot's CEO, Nicolo Laurent, has been a massive hypocrite in protecting Chief Operating Officer Scott Gelb from the consequences of his shitty, awful sexual harassment behavior at the company. Riot talked a very big game about cleaning up their act and enforcing actual consequences towards the people who have been engaging in harassment at the company, but when push came to shove, they still defaulted to the same mealy-mouthed rich boy protection racket where the people who are executives and at the higher levels of the company can get away with doing whatever the hell they want to anyone who works under them with no real consequences whatsoever, while the people who are rank and file at the company can get fired for the slightest infraction. So this is just your little reminder and PSA that Riot Games is a company run by the exact same kind of suit and tie boys club mutual masturbation society corporate hypocrites that run the business at EA, Konami, Ubisoft, and Activision. Anyway, let's get back to talking about the new champion. So, one of the first things that everybody on Twitter seemed to notice about Sylas is that he's a little bit of a hottie. He's a little bit of man candy. He's a little bit of sexualization for the female/gay male gaze, and that's certainly a lovely little bone to throw to those particular members of the League of Legends audience. And there is a little bit of an interesting discussion to be had in the sense that he's literally, a big, handsome, scruffy, buff dude who's got chains on his hands and he uses them to whip people. Like, the association with kink is pretty inevitable. And what I'm curious about is whether that presents a problem for the character design, that no matter what else the character is going to be about, the shirtlessness and, the having the kinky whips for hands and just being a handsome dude might get in the way of the fact that his character fantasy has absolutely nothing to do with sexuality. And I'm not really sure I have a clear answer to that one, because when he is supposed to be a revolutionary, a political leader outside of just his role as a rabble-rouser in combat who burns things down and kills people, then this being seductive, being attractive, like there's a point to making that a visual metaphor as a part of the character, like that there's a seduction to him, that there is an attraction to him, and that maybe he binds you up in his ideals so that he changes your mind or something. Like there is something to that as a political leader he's supposed to have a certain amount of charisma, and you can literalize that charisma by simply making him physically attractive. On the other hand, it's not really clear to me how much of a political leader he's supposed to be from his design, because his character design as it's going to be appearing in-game is 100% about being break your chains, anarchist, riot in the street, anarchy in the UK kind of character, and 0% about being a political leader. When you look at his character design as it's presented in the splash art and in the in-game model, it is 100% about his arms. It's 100% about his hands and his chains. Now, from a thematic perspective, that's actually pretty clever, that you have this character who has taken chains of petricite, which is this material in the League of Legends universe that suppresses magic and steals the power from mages, and he has turned that into his greatest weapon against his own oppressors. And that, of course, jives really, really well with his ultimate, which again is all about taking power from the enemy and turning it against them. Like, that's a really brilliant design decision. The trouble is, because so much of his character design is focused specifically on how he behaves in-game, how he behaves in combat, who he is on Summoner's Rift, there really isn't a lot of space left over in the design to communicate who he's supposed to be off the Rift. This idea that he's a revolutionary leader, that he's sort of this political rallying point for the oppressed magic users of Demacia. And that aspect of his personality is really being played up quite hard in his reveal trailer of him as an angry firebrand orator, whipping the mob into a frenzy as they march on the palace to bring justice to the oppressors who have been destroying us for so long. So the guy we see in the character design is the street fighter, the scrapper, the guy on the front lines, but the person he's supposed to be going by his lore and the way that he's being presented as a voice is the ideological leader, the thought leader, the political leader, the guy who's guiding a movement, the general, the person who's in charge, not the guy who's on the front lines. Compare and contrast how aggressive and in-your-face Sylas is with the, reserved restraint of someone like Swain, for instance. To be fair, though, I don't really know how you would have made a design that could encompass both aspects of the personality. I really think, from a character design perspective, Riot probably had to go with the one that most accurately communicates his gameplay, and they would have to leave the other aspect of the character to the lore development and to the story, and, you know, maybe if he gets a comic series somewhere down the line, that kind of thing can come more on display in a visual way as well. But when it comes to the gameplay and what happens on Summoner's Rift, ultimately, it's probably the right decision to just focus on the Street Fighter aspect of him. Now, going by his splash art and how his character model is presented in-game, the Sylas that we see in-game is clearly supposed to be Sylas pretty immediately after he has escaped from prison, where he was imprisoned for 15 long years, which raises a rather important question about his character design, which is, why doesn't he look like he has just escaped after being in chains for 15 years? Like, this dude looks like he has some immaculate skincare and grooming routines going on. This dude looks like he's been able to do CrossFit and eat protein powder every day for those 15 years. And I think, honestly, him being so relatively untouched and immaculate kind of weakens the theme of him being a prisoner who is escaping his chains to correct an injustice. I would kind of have liked to see him be a little bit more unkept, be a little bit more undernourished. Like, I don't mean that he shouldn't have muscles or anything, but rather than being these big, bulging fitness muscles, they should be the sort of wiry muscles of a prisoner who's been trying to exercise as much as they could while getting, you know, a substandard amount of calories to power their muscle growth. I think his cheeks should be sunken in and a little bit sallow. I think you should be able to see his ribs in a kind of unpleasant and unhealthy way. I think maybe he should have some scars from being mistreated by the guards, or like some visible chafing from that giant collar he's been wearing around his neck for 15 years. Hell, if you want to go extreme with it, maybe even have his skin grown in around the collar as a visual metaphor for just how much he's carrying the trauma of his imprisonment with him. I think there is a missed opportunity to show on his character design how scarred and how wounded this man has been by his treatment at the hands of an unjust Demacian government. I think there is a missed opportunity to showcase some of the personal reasons he carries with him for why the Demacian government and the Demacian royal family and those people who serve them must be destroyed. If we're supposed to be seeing him as he looked almost immediately after escaping prison, I think it misses the mark a little bit to show him being, you know, well-fed and well-groomed and well-cared for and healthy. There was an opportunity there to tell the story of Demacia's cruelty by showing the consequences of that cruelty on his body. And it kind of sucks when they missed out on that, seemingly in the name of keeping him hot and attractive. So, to try and sum it all up a bit, Sylas is a well-worn archetype, and he's been competently slotted into a space in the lore that needed an archetype like him. Visually, his design serves his gameplay more than it serves his personality, but it does a really good job of serving the gameplay. Sylas leaves his characterization outside of Summoner's Rift primarily to his lore and voice lines, which it's hard to argue is a wrong choice, even if I have some nitpicks and a few niggles with it. He's a character who I would be very interested to see take a central role in where Demacia is going as a region, but given Riot's still spotty history with his lore development, I'm worried he'll never really get to live up to his potential. Hey, thank you very much for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, there's a like button down below. You can also subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon and the other YouTube things that you can leave a comment and stuff, which is good because it helps the channels. If you want to do that, I'd be very grateful for that. If you want to support the channel and help me pay for food and rent and, you know, sometimes also buy pants, which, you know, pants are good. I like pants. Then you can head on over to Patreon, where there's a few tiers and there's some rewards if that's a thing that you want. If you don't want to sign up for like a monthly donation thing, then there is a link to Coffee down in the description where you can give small one-time donations as a kind of, just as a way to tip me, if that's something you're interested in. Of course, if you're not able to or you're not willing to you know, support the channel financially, that's completely okay. I take that very much as a gift, and I'm just happy that you've watched the video this far. If you have not enjoyed this video, well, fortunately, there is a way to make your displeasure known. Look below the video and see there the wretched creature known as the dislike button. Observe how it is bound in chains of code. Let your displeasure rain down upon it. Shower it with negativity. Drown it in hate, for that is all that it deserves. Thank you very much for watching.